everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Clifford Winston, a senior fellow of economic studies at the Brookings Institution and co-author of Revitalizing a Nation, Competition and Innovation in the U.S. Transportation System. Clifford, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thanks for having me.
This week, we saw dock workers up and down the eastern seaboard go on strike. You wrote an op-ed for the New York Times called This port strike is the October surprise our election didn't need." The dock workers did reach a tentative agreement on Thursday night. They're back at work today, Friday. But talk to us about your article, because you said in your piece that this could have been completely avoided. How so?
Yes, so what the strike did is it exposed something which I don't think the industry wanted exposed. And I think this is going to be the sort of collateral damage from all this, that they're fighting over a large pie. There's a lot of money that they're fighting over. The shipping industry makes a lot of money, and hundreds of billions following the pandemic. And workers, longshoremen and foremen and supervisors, their salaries are quite high compared with other blue-collar workers' salaries. So when you have a situation like this, you first ask yourself, well, is it because this industry is so efficient and innovative, and so they're paying high wages to their talented workers that enable them to be this way? Or is there something else going on? And it's that something else that was going on which really spurred my piece, and what that something else is called rent sharing. And what rent sharing is a situation where government regulates an industry, provides it with protection. The industry makes more money, higher profits, and its labor force says, look, we want to share in those higher profits. And the industry says, okay, we're going to give you some of the money. And this is pretty much what the setup was. And labor had gotten to the point where they said, look, you're now making a lot more than you were making during some of our earlier agreements, and we want some of it. And otherwise, we're going to strike. And so my point was, look, this didn't have to happen if we hadn't had government policy that created this rent-sharing relationship between the industry and its workers.
But it did happen, and you're calling this rent sharing a collateral damage that has been exposed. So there has been a tentative agreement that was reached. So what's next?
Okay. So when I say it's collateral damage, the collateral damage is to both labor and management. That is, we now know about it. And, we always did, but, there wasn't that much attention to it. And there certainly wasn't that much attention to it to the point the problem could lead to really what could be a catastrophic strike. I mean, if this lasted for months, this would be a crippling blow to the economy. Obviously, it could have affected the election. So this was potentially a big deal, and there's nothing to say that this couldn't happen in the future. All right. So where I see it, it's not time to sort of just sort of breathe a sigh of relief. It's time to sort of double down on the problems with this industry, which I would add is really the last bastion of rent sharing in the entire U.S. transportation system. We did have this in other parts of the system, but deregulation ended that for the most part. This is the last one, and it's time to end it.
So who do you think should end it, or whose policies do you think would end it when it comes to Harris, when it comes to Donald Trump? Because as you know, you noted that this could have been an October surprise. The Harris campaign this morning must be breathing a sigh of relief because it has been resolved as of now. But whose policies do you think are better equipped to handle this?
All right, well, let me provide some history here and then see where we have a comparison between other industries and this industry and how things were resolved. Way back when, let's look at the trucking industry. They were a regulated industry, okay, to provide service in that industry. You had to have authority to serve specific routes. The rates were regulated, and truckers made a fair amount of money. That was actually a pretty good way to earn a living, I mean, in terms of what the salaries were. And of course, the Teamsters were very powerful. They represented the trucking union. They negotiated with the managers. Well, what happened? They deregulated the trucking industry. They being Congress, 1980 Motor Carrier Act, and President Carter signed it. Okay, and it happened at a time, though, when the nation had been suffering from a high bout of inflation, or an inflationary decade, and they saw trucking deregulation as a way to address that problem. So rather than focus on the specific inefficiencies of regulation, which were raising prices, which hurt shippers and then lead to higher prices, they just cut right to the chase and said, look, this is a policy against inflation. All right. Congress then went ahead, passed the legislation, president signed it. Okay. Now, the union may want to bargain with industry, trucking firms, but there isn't that kind of money to be shared. All right, so they're not going to be able to say, look, you better give us a 60% or 70% increase in our wages, or we go on strike. And they say, well, you do that, you're basically going to put us out of business, and you're going to basically lose a job. The rents aren't there. All right, so that's pretty much what happened. To a certain extent, that was also true in the airline industry. There was rent sharing going on there. There was such a thing as, the $300,000 a year pilot. And same kind of deal. We had deregulation, and it was much tougher for people there, workers, to get the high wages they were getting. And again, it was Congress and the president. We're setting up the same thing, right? We have regulations that protect ocean shipping industry from competition, different ones, but still have them. Another part of that industry that is important is the ports themselves are public, and there's not significant competition among the ports. Makes it harder, obviously, to have new entrants. So all these things are helping, the shipping industry increase their profits. So this, again, would have to be steps that are taken by Congress and the president. So it wouldn't necessarily even be enough for Harris and Trump to sort of want this. They really have to get Congress to get behind this. But there is the lesson that we learned with deregulation of trucking and airlines. You have to sell this, okay? And you're not going to sell it on the sort of details of the regulatory policy. You need a bigger picture way to sell it, the way they sold airline and trucking deregulation. And I think the way to sell it is, look, we cannot afford a cataclysmic shock to our supply chain, which could happen if they strike and it's prolonged. And there's no guarantee it won't. They'll settle it now, but who knows? And so I think focusing on that, saying we need a more reliable, stable supply chain, this will do it. It'll end rents at the same time. It'll give us a more flexible, competitive ocean transportation system. Could be a way to sell it. Now, again, it's up to them to do it. And as always, there are political headwinds. But I think my point is that's what we need to start thinking about in the aftermath, if you will, of this short strike.
Well, it certainly grabbed everyone's attention this week because, as you know, the economy is a top issue facing voters a month out from the election. Inflation is a top issue facing voters, and both were threatened by this strike. Estimates did suggest that the strike could cost the economy between $3 and $4.5 billion a day. The strike only did last 3 days, though. So will we see any economic impact from those 3 days?
Oh, I don't think so. No. I mean, remember, when these people do these estimates on the effects of a strike, I don't think they're carefully accounting for responses, right, that shippers and whatever consumers are going to make. So there'll be efforts, right, within the transportation system to mitigate the impact of a strike. So I think the numbers you hear are gross overestimates. And we know if this thing lasted longer, there'll be adjustments that people make, both on the shipping side and on the consuming side. I was already planning on getting my bananas from somewhere else, that kind of thing. So, I think you can overdo it there. But no, if it lasted, it would be impactful. No question about it.
Hearing that is obviously a relief. Someone who's probably breathing an extra sigh of relief, as I said earlier, is the Harris campaign. This could have been an October surprise for her. It was squashed rather quickly. Does that look good for her, though? Is because this was able to reach an agreement so fast?
That's a tricky question because you really need a theory of the electorate, right? In other words, you want to say, is anything good or bad for Harris or Trump? You need to get your arms around this electorate, which is not particularly easy for me to do as someone who's correctly perceived as probably the worst kind of elite imaginable by the MAGA people and even by other elite people. They know what I am. But let me suggest the following. I've spent a long time just trying to really understand MAGA, where that's coming from, and how they're thinking about things. And my sense, and this may be controversial, but I think it's right, is that there are just a lot more people in this country, a lot more than I ever realized, that are just fundamentally frightened. That is, just life is very challenging, and it's become increasingly challenging, whether it be globalization, advances in technology, the growth of women in the labor force, obviously skilled and even unskilled immigrants. All this has made things pretty frightening, apparently, for a lot of white men in this country. And my view is that what Trump did is not make them more fearful. The fear was there. They were frightened. I mean, this was a challenging time. Men take a while to grow up and become secure anyway in the best of times, right? So this was even worse. I think all Trump tapped into was saying, look, I get you. No one else does. They say things are great or, talk about things that have nothing to do with the things that you're concerned about, but I get you. All right. And that's really where our divide is. And I think the implication of that is, I don't think most of MAGA or a lot of people on the right these days really care or think that much about government doing anything constructive. I think they just don't want government either to get in the way and cause trouble, or if they're going to do anything positive, it's to, quote, identify and take action against the bad people, the people who they think are making life tougher for them. So, to some extent, it'd be tough because, Trump would sort of make a big deal about it. But then the implication is, okay, then Harris should do something, right? I mean, if this was such a bad occurrence, what's Harris going to do? But then again, MAGA, a lot on the right will say, we really don't want government getting involved in stuff. They only mess it up, right? So it's a little tricky to sort of say what effect this would have, because you look at least on the right, my sense is they would say, we just want them out of it. Now, the left, there may be more force, but again, you got to thread the needle because, the left doesn't want to alienate unions and they wouldn't want Harris getting involved and pushing for a settlement where, unions, didn't get what they wanted or were forced to give up their demands. So I think it's hard to say politically how all of this would shake out.
Well, the tentative agreement expires after the election, so the can was kicked down the road post November 5th. So what are you looking out for next?
Well, I think they're pretty close on the wages. I mean, they seem to have split the difference, right? I think they wanted up to something like 77% increase. The industry, the container shippers, so on and so forth, shipping industry was offering initially 50. They split the difference, close now to 60. My sense is they're pretty close there. I think the bigger issue is on the technology and allowing automation, right, which could hurt employment. in this industry. And my guess is that they'll probably, the industry will concede on that. I mean, I think they got to be careful. I mean, they know it. Look, they're making money, right? Why, at this point, why cause trouble? Things are good. They can get a 6-year agreement. They avoided a major strike. My guess is they'll sort out whatever remaining things they need to sort out. Again, and that's because they got a good deal now. I think that we can't underestimate how important that is.
Well, as the economy continues to be top of mind for Americans, Clifford Winston, I hope you come back on with me and continue the discussions. Thanks again for joining me.
Glad to be here, and I will update you if I'm wrong.